I've had two patients ask me today, why don't I crack as much as I used to? And of course, they're referring to the adjustments when we adjust them. It's a really good question, actually, and it was not everyone has that experience. Some people don't find that the cracking stays the same, but I want to talk to you about what the cracking actually is and why it might change over time and how that's related to the body changing, because I think it's quite interesting. So the clicking noise when you get adjusted is, of course, gas coming out of the joints. So it's nitrogen coming out of the fluid in between in the joints. So the nitrogen is bubbles of nitrogen are formed when the fluid's formed, and it's meant to be there. It's just a normal byproduct of the fluid getting made. But what happens when you do an adjustment is you're pushing the joint the way it wants to go. So if it was a finger, I'd be going like that. I'm not pushing it too far, I'm just pushing it a little bit further than it has been going to free it up and give it back its normal range of motion. But because I've suddenly changed the pressure in the fluid, those little bubbles of nitrogen go pop, 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 and it's called the cavitation. So that's what the clicking is. But yeah, these patients are right. The nature and the sound, the volume of the cavitation, of the clicking does change over time sometimes. Now there's a few day-to-day reasons like that, like hydration is a really obvious one. So if you're dehydrated, you tend to click less. Maybe because there's less available fluid in the joints, because when you're dehydrated, your body takes the fluid, puts it in your brain instead, because that's the most important area. So sometimes if someone's not very clicky that day, I'll ask them, like, oh, have you had much to drink? And they'll say, oh no, actually today I normally drink more, but I haven't had time or whatever. So that's often related to dehydration. Sometimes it's temperature, activity, atmospheric pressure. You know, we're made of materials just like everything else. So your body kind of expands and contracts depending on the temperature and the pressure of the environment, just like a door frame does, for example. But this is the main thing. I think the main reason why some people find that the clicking, the cracking is so much louder in the very beginning is because we're moving things that haven't moved in ages. So we often refer to it as a creaky gate. So you're starting to get a rusty, creaky old gate moving for the first time. When you first move it, it's going to go, and then after you get a bit of WD on there and you start to move it around, it's going to free up and it's going to go, yeah, patients don't sound like that, but you know what I mean. So in the very beginning, you're moving something up, you're freeing something up that hasn't moved maybe in years. And what that means is that these joints, so these are the joints in the spine, when joints are immobile, so they haven't moved for a while because there's muscle spasm or because of an injury or for whatever reason, then you get scar tissue growing across the joint. So it looks like kind of like a cobweb. So it looks like a cobwebby film. Now we know this because if you get someone who has had spinal surgery and joints that have been literally fused together, and then you go back in and you look at it, even after I think it's 2 months, you can see this stuff starting to form. So it doesn't take very long for the joints to start to literally grow. They're like they're growing moss over them because they're not moving, that kind of thing. So you start to get this this scar tissue around the joint, and of course that just makes it even stiffer, and that makes it less likely for you to be able to free it up and move it. So no amount of stretching, yoga, foam rolling and all that kind of thing is gonna do it, because you just can't get that joint moving. So that's why when we first do adjustments on people like that, sometimes you get this almighty sound, and it's the scar tissue breaking up. And you want the scar tissue to break up. That's what we're trying to do, because we're trying to get that moving again, because that's what's going to help it to feel better and also start to get the fluid going back around the joints and healing it and repairing it better. But of course, as you go along, it might not be so dramatic. And I think, and this is relevant to also to how people generally make progress. So oftentimes people will make dramatic progress in the very beginning, and then it'll start to kind of peter off a bit as things are just stabilizing more. You know, they're not getting the same incremental improvement session by session, which is absolutely fine, because nothing goes in a straight line in terms of healthcare. Things are it's always kind of meanders around until you reach the end goal. Having said that, sometimes it starts off very slowly and then suddenly it starts to change, and that can also be the same with with the adjustments. Sometimes it takes, someone's back's really stiff. It can take 3, 4, 5 sessions before you really start to get any movement in there. So you're kind of chipping away at this ice block, and then all of a sudden it'll be, and it starts to move, and then you get this big release. Then it suddenly feels better, they can move better, and they feel a big relief, and then they start to make the significant changes. But for the most part, it's those dramatic changes happen in the beginning, and then it kind of tails off as you start to stabilize and normalize function. Yeah, so there's a bit of anatomy for you. Hope that's interesting. If you've got any questions about any of that, just give us a shout, and I'll see you soon. Take care.